Well, good morning and Happy New Year. Did anyone stay up till midnight? It was hard to sleep anyway, all the booming in the neighborhood. Didn't you hear it? Oh, fireworks. I don't remember so many in past years, but yeah. Okay, so let's start with the prayers, and maybe we can generate a particularly strong motivation of wanting to benefit other beings as much as we can, both now during this session, but also for today, for this month, for this year, for the rest of our life. Really generate as strong and sincere altruistic motivation as you can.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one last gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor of the world, supreme God of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you are born on this earth, you pay 7 strides, and said, I am supreme in this world. You who are wise, then I bow. With your body's form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Aim that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With a supreme sign, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path of freedom to, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the foe of false, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, o'erland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Gurana Mandalakam Niryakayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Okay, so I would like to finish the last few verses of this little text and then try to go through the questions. Hopefully there'll be time to go through all of them and just see whatever last things come up before we finish. But one thing too, one of the things I talked about yesterday afternoon, I mentioned hearing one of my teachers, Cancer Jamba Tekchok, explain why when we have the direct realization of emptiness, conventional things disappear. And I wanted to check if I got it correctly. And so I went and looked at the transcript of that course. And I did find this. He said, and I'll kind of explain a little bit because the translator is someone whose first language is not English. So he's an interesting way of speaking English. So I'll kind of give a little explanation on the way. So he says, when you reach the final negation, that the self-established self, that's another way of talking about the inherently existing self, so that false self that we're trying to refute. So when you reach the final negation that this kind of self is empty, that it does not exist, that experience pulls with it the conventional appearance. So not only does this false self, inherently existing self, disappears, but also the conventional appearance, even in the sense of a conventionally existent self, that disappears too. And then he goes on to say, however, it is not that the conventionally existent self has been eliminated on the basis of a valid cognizer. So what that means is that experience is not experiencing the non-existence of that kind of self. We're not like refuting the conventional existence of a self. It is not eliminated on purpose, but the meditation takes the appearance with it by the way. So it's just like a side effect that it disappears. But the disappearance of the conventionally existent self isn't that you have realized that it doesn't exist. That's not the case. So he says it is not a process of negating that type of existence. So we're not negating the conventional existent self. Just the appearance of it goes away, but is not refuted. So one does not need to fear that one has refuted nominal existence. Okay, so it does happen. People can feel scared when that experience happens. But Cancer Jamba Tekchok was trying to reassure us, we don't need to be afraid. Don't worry. You haven't gone out of existence. I guess that's what it feels like, but that's not the case. And then he says, in fact, when you stop the meditation, you see that there is a person who comes and goes and so forth. And that refers to the post-meditation period, not to the meditation itself. So when you're sitting there and meditating and having that realization of emptiness, this I, ordinary sense of I, disappears. But then when you come out of meditation, it's there again. So it's like it hasn't really gone away, just temporarily. And he also said that it would be a big mistake to try to reaffirm the conventional existence of the self during that meditative equipoise, because that will bring in conventional appearances. And so when you do have that experience of, the disappearance of the inherently existing self, as well as even the conventional self. If you start thinking, oh, do I exist or not, and you're trying to reaffirm that, then that kind of messes up your meditation, I think. That's my words, but he was saying that would be a mistake to do, because then, you're having conventional appearances again. And my understanding is that when we do have that experience of emptiness, just pure emptiness, we need to stay with that as long as we can, and not kind of get scared and jump out of it and, am I here? Yeah, and I seem to recall Jeffrey Hopkins saying something similar in one of his books, Emptiness Yoga. He says, yeah, don't worry about trying to reaffirm this conventional I. So I did find that much of what I said yesterday, but the other part that I mentioned yesterday, like the reason why the conventional appearance disappears, that it's because of long familiarity with seeing things completely mixed with this false overlay of inherent existence. And so when that goes, everything else goes too. I couldn't find that. I'm really sure I heard somebody say it. It was either him, maybe it was somewhere else, some other time, maybe it was another teacher. I wasn't able to find it. So hold that lightly, not tightly. I still think it's probably true, but I'm just not sure what is the source of that. It does make sense to me, though, that we're so habituated to seeing ourselves as inherently existing, that when we realize we're not inherently existing, that even the ordinary conventional I vanishes.
Maybe you can help me clarify a doubt, because it seems that the mind you distinguished the two types of consciousness or cognitions yesterday. That one is sense cognition or perception, and the other is, what did you call it, an ultimate cognition?
Yeah, something they call ultimate valid cognizers.
Yeah. So that's not looking for, it's not looking for conventional objects. It's just looking to see if something inherently exists. So conventional appearances wouldn't appear to that.
Yeah. I'll keep looking and see if I can find the source of that that idea that I had. Anyway, so just to give a kind of summary of what we have looked at so far in this, with regard to this third principal aspect of the path. So first, Lama Tsongkhapa said that renunciation, the determination to be free of samsara, and bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha to help all sentient beings, although those are essential things we need to develop, we need to cultivate, but those alone are not enough. We need this wisdom realizing emptiness, which is the ultimate true nature of all things. And only if we develop that can we cut the root of samsara and free ourselves from samsara, and then be able to help others be free as well. So he's just pointing out how that is vital if we want to get out of samsara and help others in the best way. And then he recommends using the reasoning of dependent arising to understand emptiness, because emptiness is a subtle phenomena. It's not something obvious, something we can directly see with our eyes and so forth. So we need to use a process of reasoning and develop what's called an inference. So an inference is an understanding of something that is normally hidden to our direct perceptions. For example, detectives, when they're trying to solve a crime, they gather all these clues and they put them all together, and then they get a pretty good idea of who the culprit was and so on. And we also use it. It's something we experience, even though we may not think this is an inference, but it is. For example, when we see smoke coming out of the chimney of a house or a building, then what do we understand by that? There's a fire. Can we see the fire? Probably not, because it's in the furnace and the wood-burning stove inside the house. So we can't directly perceive the fire, but we can infer there is a fire burning in the furnace because of the smoke. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And so, yeah, there's a lot of experiences like that where we, like my mom used to use this expression, I put two and two together, right? And I figured out what you guys have been up to. So, yeah, that's called inference in Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist logic. But it refers to a particular type of mind, a state of mind that we reach by putting two and two together and coming up with an understanding. So that's what we need to do to understand emptiness. We need to, use various lines of logic and reasoning to realize emptiness. So dependent arising is one of those, and it has certain advantages. So we, learn about dependent arising, and we contemplate it. We think about how things depend on other things for their existence, and get more and more familiar with that. And it's not like easy and quick, but eventually that will lead us to an understanding of emptiness, that nothing exists inherently or independently from its own side, because that's just impossible. That kind of existence is impossible. Nothing is independently existing. So that will lead us to understand emptiness, and then with that we can overcome ignorance and other afflictions. So this little text is very short, and it doesn't really explain emptiness. So I don't think you would be able to understand emptiness just relying on this little text. You would need other texts, and Lama Tsongkhapa did write a number of other texts about emptiness, and there's also a lot of other books available in English. And in fact, I remembered Venerable Children's going to be teaching Insight into Emptiness. Yeah? We don't know exactly when. It depends on when she... Huh? Yeah, when she gets back and rests. And at some point, she's going to start teaching that book. It will be online. It will be available. So that is a book by Khenso Jamba Tekchok, this Lama I was talking about. And some years ago, he was staying in Land of Medicine Buddha in California. And every Sunday morning, he would give a talk about emptiness. And I don't know how long they went on for, quite a while, months, maybe a year or more. Wonderful teachings. He's just an amazing teacher and a really good translator as well, Venerable Steve. And so those talks that he gave were transcribed, and then Venerable Children edited them and made them into that book, Insight into Emptiness. Are there copies available? Yeah, that's a nice book. It's not too big, maybe this big. It's not like some of them are huge. And yeah, I think it's quite clear. So you're welcome to get a copy of that, and then she'll be going through that book and explaining it probably once a week or so. We don't know exactly when, but just keep, 2 times a week? Oh, okay. Well, it's to be decided. So, yeah, just keep looking at the Abbey News website and look for that if you really want to learn more about emptiness. And yeah, so it seems that the point Lama Tsongkhapa is trying to emphasize here is that when we do develop an understanding of emptiness, it should be such that it doesn't undermine or contradict our understanding of and our acceptance of conventional things like our own existence and the existence of other beings and samsara and karma, cause and effect, you know. Because I think that did happen at his time, that some meditators, even though they had a good understanding of emptiness, when it came to, you know, these conventional phenomena, they had trouble, yeah. And so he said it's really, really important to maintain understanding of and conviction in these things, especially karma, cause and effect, because if we lose touch with that, then we can really go wrong. And I was also thinking, I don't know if this has ever happened to anybody, but if someone did think that emptiness means nothing exists, then you might think, well, that means sentient beings don't exist, and their suffering doesn't exist, and samsara doesn't exist, afflictions don't exist. So then what would that do to your bodhicitta, to your love and your compassion and your wish to benefit others? You know, it seems like you'd lose energy for that. Like, what's the point? They don't exist anyway. So yeah, it could really damage the whole understanding of the spiritual path and the energy to follow the spiritual path. And so, yeah, if that ever happens to us, if we start going in that direction, we need to be careful and understand that you're going the wrong way. You made a wrong turn there. You know, you need to go back and get back on the right track. And if you might need help from a teacher to do that, but yeah, so we need to correct our practice to make sure that we can equally understand and accept both the emptiness of inherent existence of things and the conventional existence of things, like samsara and cause and effect and so on. And there's one verse in the Guru Puja. This is a practice we do here 2 times a month. And then the last part of that practice is a review of all the stages of the path. And we're asking for inspiration from our teachers and 3 jewels of refuge to help us understand these and gain the realization of these. So one verse there says, samsara and nirvana lack even an atom of inherent nature, while cause and effect and dependent arising are infallible. Inspire me to realize Nagarjuna's thought that these are non-contradictory and mutually supportive. Mutually, yeah, they support each other, they don't contradict each other. And it mentions Nagarjuna, who's on the wall over here, but he was Indian philosopher not too long after the Buddha, just a few centuries after the Buddha, and he's the one who really clarified the Buddha's teachings on emptiness, which were given in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. But at the time when Buddha gave those teachings, there were probably people who got them and, you know, realized emptiness. But later, people would read those sutras and not understand what the Buddha was talking about. So Nagarjuna wrote texts to clarify the meaning. And so he's regarded as the sort of founder of the Madhyamaka, or the middle way school of Buddhist philosophy. And so his texts are very much valued, I think in most Mahayana countries, especially Tibet. They really respect Nagarjuna. And Lama Tsongkhapa often quotes him and explains what Nagarjuna is saying. So he's saying this is the meaning, this is the intention of Nagarjuna, is that, you know, we should understand ultimate truth and conventional truth as mutually supportive and not contradictory. Okay, so let's go through the last few verses. And I mean, there's a lot of material here, but I'll just give a brief explanation and then hopefully plant some seeds, and you'll be able to study more on your own and get the understanding of these. Okay, so the last verse on page 32, it says, when these two realizations are simultaneous and concurrent, from the mere sight of infallible dependent arising comes definite knowledge which completely destroys all modes of mental grasping. At that time, the analysis of the profound view is complete. So this verse is explaining the criteria of when we have reached the conclusion or the completion of our analysis and gain the correct understanding of emptiness. So the two realizations he's referring to in the first line are understanding emptiness, that things are empty of inherent existence, as well as understanding dependent arisings, the infallibility of cause and effect. So in the previous verse, he said, if you see those things as separate or contradictory, and you can't sort of put them together, you can't hold both of them and understand how they can both be true, then you kind of missed what the Buddha is trying to teach. But when you're able to understand them or have those realizations simultaneously and concurrently, so then, let me see my notes. So when your understanding of both emptiness and dependent arising, how things exist conventionally, when these two increase and improve, then you no longer see them as contradictory. You get beyond that point of thinking that they are contradictory. And instead, you're able to understand both of them, even simultaneously, as it says here, and in a mutually supportive way, meaning that the understanding of one actually supports and enhances the understanding of the other, and vice versa. Okay, so you go beyond seeing them as contradictory, and you actually see them as mutually supportive of each other, kind of like two sides of a coin. And so I'll read a part of the explanation of this verse from volume 8. I got the right number now. Volume 8, Realizing the Profound View. And this is on page 270. So His Holiness says, when meditators who have an inferential or direct realization of emptiness, so the first understanding or realization we get of emptiness is an inferential one, using a reason to prove to ourselves that things are empty. So that's conceptual. That's on the level of conceptual mind, thought. And that's great. It's great to have that, but we need to go beyond that and have a direct realization. That means our mind directly, non-conceptually experiences emptiness. So that's the main realization that will enable us to eliminate ignorance and the other afflictions. So he's saying here, with either of those two kinds of realizations, inferential or direct, these occur during meditation, when one is in meditation. And then when the meditator arises from that meditation, and their experience of emptiness has not faded, so the experience they had during meditation is still fresh, still alive in their minds, hasn't disappeared, then just when they see something like a person or an object, a car, a house, or whatever, seeing any phenomena will induce the understanding that these phenomena rely on causes and conditions. So as soon as you see something, you see a car, you see a person, you'll immediately understand, oh, that arises from causes and conditions. Normally we don't have that experience, right? We don't see things as coming from causes and conditions. We have to think about that, but they immediately have that understanding. And then that understanding, in turn, has the force to induce another mind that ascertains emptiness conceptually. So as soon as they see an object, they know it arose from causes and conditions, and that understanding will induce a mind that ascertains emptiness. This is a conceptual mind because you're out of meditation. You're no longer in that deep state of meditation you were before. So you're still operating on the level of conceptuality. So you have this conceptual understanding of emptiness. And so that's what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here. From the mere sight of infallible dependent arising comes definite knowledge, which completely destroys all modes of mental grasping. So just the sight of some dependent arising, like a person or a car or a house, will bring about this definite knowledge of emptiness. So back to what His Holiness says, this powerful experience comprehends without a doubt that emptiness and dependent arising come to the same point and are not contradictory. Okay, so this all happens very, very instantly, very fast in your mind. Now, emptiness dawns as the meaning of dependent arising, and dependent arising dawns as the meaning of emptiness. So they use that expression that, one thing dawns as the meaning of the other, and what that really means is that these two understandings support each other, benefit each other, enhance each other, rather than contradict each other. So this is explaining the experience of a meditator at a very high level of understanding of emptiness. I'm not there, so I'm using His Holiness's words to explain. So that's what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying in this verse, that you get to the point where these two understandings of emptiness on one hand and dependent arising on the other support each other rather than seeing them as contradictory. And so that's the sign, the criteria that the analysis of the profound view is complete. So you've kind of reached the end of your analysis. So that's just a brief explanation. There's a lot more in that volume. There's several pages of explanation, but we didn't have time to go into all of that. It's very complex. But if you are interested in knowing more, there is information on that, because it's often hard to find detailed explanation of texts like this. So I'm really happy that Venerable Chodron, I don't know if the Dalai Lama gave that explanation in a public teaching or she asked him privately to explain it, but these verses, the last few verses of this text are quite challenging. So it's nice that we have His Holiness's explanation of them. Okay, then next one. In addition, appearances clear away the extreme of inherent existence. Emptiness clears away the extreme of non-existence. When you understand the arising of cause and effect from the viewpoint of emptiness, you are not captivated by either extreme view. So this verse is talking about the two extremes that we looked at yesterday. There was a slide about those two extremes. One is, I use the term permanence. Sometimes other terms are used like absolutism or reification, these kind of complicated terms. But that simply means thinking that things exist inherently. Okay, so that is one extreme, one mistaken view we need to avoid. Here it's called the extreme of existence, thinking that things exist inherently. And then the other extreme is nihilism, or here it's called the extreme of non-existence, and that's where we think things don't exist at all. Just totally deny the existence of anything. So these are the two extremes that need to be avoided. Both have their dangers. It's kind of like falling off a tightrope with a big drop. So we really want to stay on the tightrope and avoid those two extremes. So here in this verse, he's talking about how this understanding of the two things, those two understandings, emptiness on the one hand and dependent arising on the other, will help us avoid those two extremes. So first of all, he says, appearances clear away the extreme of inherent existence. So what that means is a person who understands emptiness, when that person sees appearances, for example, a car, a person, a house, so when they have that perception of some object, they are able to avoid falling into the extreme of permanence or thinking things exist inherently, because they are certain through long familiarity and analysis and meditation, they've reached this certainty that whatever appears like a car arises in dependence on other things, like causes and conditions, parts. So they've become so strongly habituated with that understanding that immediately that comes to their mind. As soon as they see a car or a person, a body, a table, they immediately know, oh, this arose in dependence on many things, and therefore it cannot possibly be inherently existing. So this is what it means to say appearances. The appearance of an object will clear away that extreme of inherent existence. And then secondly, it says emptiness clears away the extreme of non-existence. So what that means is that this person has, again, a really strong familiarity with emptiness, really, really good understanding of emptiness. And their understanding of emptiness enables them to avoid the extreme of nihilism, because they know that the empty nature of things means that they exist dependently. They exist dependent on many, many things. Therefore, they are not completely non-existent. So their understanding of emptiness is able to help them avoid falling into the extreme of non-existence. So that's not easy to understand, but then if we don't have that experience of emptiness, you know. And Geshe Sonam Rinchen, in his commentary, there's a little book on the three principal aspects of the path, he said it's also correct to say the opposite to this, which kind of is easier to understand, that appearances help us avoid the extreme of nihilism, because just seeing an object like our body or a car will prevent us from falling into the wrong idea that it doesn't exist at all. I see it. I feel it. There's a mosquito biting me. I feel it. It must be there. So appearances can also be said to help us avoid nihilism. And emptiness helps us avoid the extreme of existence. When we understand that things do not exist inherently or independently, that prevents us from falling into the extreme of permanence, thinking things exist inherently. So that's true as well. That way of interpreting, or that way of explaining things, also is true. So that might be easier to understand. And then he says, when you understand the arising of cause and effect from the viewpoint of emptiness, you are not captivated by either extreme view. So this understanding that he's been talking about of both emptiness on the one hand and dependent arising on the other, how those are mutually supportive and not contradictory, this will enable us to avoid these two extreme views. And that's one of the main reasons why this reasoning of dependent arising is said to be so good, so powerful, and even the best, the monarch of reasons, because it not only does it help us understand emptiness, get that incredible realization, but it also helps us to avoid those two dangers, two extremes. Okay, last verse. He says, in this way, when you have realized the exact points of the three principal aspects of the path, by depending on solitude, generate the power of joyous effort and quickly accomplish the final goal, my spiritual child. So I think I remember reading that this text was actually written in response to a request by one of his disciples. Yeah, so one of his devoted disciples asked him, maybe he said, please give me a short text explaining the most important points. So, now go and meditate on it. And here when it says solitude, in Tibet, and still today, there are many people following the Tibetan tradition who do go into solitary retreat, or sometimes a group retreat, and they just spend all their time, like day after day, month after month, year after year, sometimes to the end of their life, just focusing on meditation, studying and meditating, practicing. Most people aren't able to do that for various reasons, or even if you try, it may not work out for various reasons. So it doesn't mean that is the only way that we can attain realization. So we can still, live another kind of life. Like here in the monastery, we're not always in single-pointed meditation. We have lots of things to do. And most people, lay people, have jobs and families and activities that they're involved in. So most of us aren't able to just focus single-pointedly on practice. But it's good to at least sometimes have a time for retreat. Like you came here for this retreat, and you can come back for more retreats in the future. You can also do retreat on your own if you're strong enough to keep the discipline. So I know a lot of people who do that. Even just a weekend. Yeah, you can take a weekend off and just focus on study and practice. So it's good to at least have some periods of time of doing retreat, so that you can go deeper in your study, your practice, and your meditation. And in Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's commentary, he talks about being far-sighted. It's good to be far-sighted. The Dalai Lama also talks about that. We should have a long-term sense about our practice. Sometimes people get really anxious and they want to attain realizations like right away, today, this weekend, this month, this year. It's good to have aspiration to improve our understanding and our practice and gain realizations, but that's not so helpful, because then we're like putting pressure on ourselves, and thinking that way may not be very realistic. The Dalai Lama says, most people, you have these stories of people like Milarepa who did it in one lifetime, but he said that's actually very rare, 1 in a billion. So most of us, it will take more than one life to get the realizations and get to enlightenment. And the Dalai Lama says it's better to think that way, to think however long it takes, even many lifetimes, even eons, I will just keep practicing, keep working towards the goal. Yeah, and Geshe Sana said it's also good to be broad-minded, in the sense of being willing to train in all the aspects of the path, like all the three principal aspects of the path, and not just have a narrow idea, oh, I just want to do this. I just want to practice mindfulness and get good at that and forget about these other things. To really try to open your mind and embrace, all the important aspects of the path. And he also said it's important to be relaxed, practice in moderation. Again, people sometimes get really, hyped up and put pressure on themselves, and that can backfire because you can get, you're physically and mentally, you can get out of balance and then not be able to practice at all for a while. You have to take time off. So it is important to practice in a steady way. And in the Tibetan tradition, they use this analogy that I find helpful. They say we should be like an elephant rather than a rabbit. A rabbit, can run very fast, but it's not very organized. It runs this way and then it stops, and then it runs that way and then it stops, and then it runs this way, and then kind of, a bit crazy. Whereas an elephant, the way an elephant walks is just steadily, step by step, kind of slow, but it keeps going a long time in the same direction. They say the pace of our practice should be more like that, rather than, in spurts. We have this enthusiasm for a few days, and then we stop for a few days or a few weeks, and then we start again. So that's not so helpful. It's better to, like I said, Lama Yeshe said, just even a little bit every day, 5 minutes a day, and just keep going. Don't give up. And also, last night I realized there was something else about purification practice that I probably should have talked about earlier, but I didn't think of it. And that is, what does it actually mean to purify? How does it happen? We do these, these practices, these mantras and prostrations, and so what's actually going on with our karma? Does it all go away? Yeah, like at the end of this retreat, when you go home, are you completely without any negative karma? So I'll just read what it says in volume 2. This is the Foundations of Buddhist Practice on page 306. So this is a nice explanation from His Holiness about, how to know if purification is happening. And it's difficult to know for sure because it depends on various factors, like the intensity of regret, how strongly you feel regret, if it's kind of strong or if it's just weak, the sincerity of our resolve to refrain from repeating the action, so that could be stronger or weaker. The concentration with which we did the remedial behavior. If you're reciting Vajrasattva mantra, but your mind is in the shopping mall or Paris or whatever. And the sincerity of our refuge in bodhicitta. So how sincerely we are taking refuge and generating altruism. So, there's varying degrees to which we cultivate those powers, those 4 powers. It also depends on whether we did the 4 opponent powers over a long or a short period of time. So this has been pretty short, but it's still possible in a short period of time if you have sincerity and intensity in those 4 powers. And whether all 4 opponent powers were applied or only some. So if you don't have all 4, but you have only 3 or 2 or 1. So there's different factors that will affect the actual purification. And it says, although purification done by ordinary beings is a term referring to those who haven't yet realized emptiness directly. So purification done by ordinary beings does not remove karmic seeds from the mind stream. So the karmic seeds don't actually get removed until we have the direct realization of emptiness. So it's only with the direct realization of emptiness that we can just get rid of those karmic seeds. But until then, they're still there. But doing purification will weaken those karmic seeds so that their results will be less intense. So we'll still get some results, but not as bad as otherwise, or will last for a shorter period of time. So here's some examples. Instead of experiencing a car accident, we may trip and stub our toe. Rather than suffering from domestic disharmony for years, we may endure it for only some weeks or months. Instead of being born in an unfortunate state, we may fall ill in this life. So you kind of get a reduced sentence. A less horrible result than otherwise. And it says, understanding this, we will not become upset when we fall ill or encounter unpleasant situations. Instead, we will think, how fortunate that a powerful destructive karma is now ripening. Compared to the intense suffering I would have experienced for a long time had it ripened in an unfortunate rebirth, I can manage the current misery. So this is what Tibetan practitioners do. I mean, they've been taught to do this, and it is helpful if we can develop this way of thinking. So when we get sick, or we stub our toe, or we have a headache, or someone yells at us, or whatever unpleasant experience we have, instead of getting all upset about that and having a pity party, if we think, oh yeah, this must be some ripening of bad karma, and if it didn't ripen like this, it might ripen in some other way, like a whole rebirth with a lot of suffering or a much worse experience. So this is like a mild version of the result of that. So seeing the situation in this way protects our mind from creating more negative karma by angrily reacting to problems, because that's what can happen sometimes. We get angry, why is this happening to me? And take our anger out on other people, blame them. So that way we're creating more negative karma. We don't want to do that. It enables our mind to remain unperturbed by this comparatively small suffering that will soon end. Now we can remind ourselves also of impermanence, that this experience we're having isn't going to last forever. It's going to be there for a while, but it will end. And if we can bear it, if we can put up with it without getting upset, that's actually one kind of patience, one type of patience or fortitude. That's virtuous. Practicing patience is virtuous. So that way we are able to create virtue instead of non-virtue when problems happen to us. And there's other things you can do, like Tonglen, meditate on compassion and so on. Meditate on emptiness. Okay, then it goes on to say, purification can also prevent the coming together of the cooperative conditions for karma to ripen. So, in order for one of our karmic seeds to ripen, there's also these other causes and conditions that have to come together. So that's one way that purification can affect that. It sort of protects us from that situation. Purification may burn the karmic seeds so that they do not bring a result. So they say, just like with seeds, ordinary seeds, if they are burned, right, they're burned in a fire, then that, I guess it doesn't happen all the time, but with some seeds, that will prevent them from being able to sprout and bring results, right? I say some because I think in Australia there are certain types of plants that need to be burned. Huh? Yeah, okay. But with, maybe vegetable seeds and flower seeds, burning will stop them from being able to grow. But only by realizing emptiness directly is the potency to produce unfortunate rebirths completely eliminated. So to really, get to the point where we won't have any more bad rebirths, we do need to have that realization of emptiness. So it is important, however hard it is, however mind-boggling it is important to work on understanding that. And then it goes on to say, it is good to seal like, put a stamp, purification practices as well as all our virtuous practices by contemplating emptiness and dependent arising. So I don't know if that's been talked about. I haven't talked about that. I don't know if anyone else did, but this is said to be the best way to dedicate when we're dedicating our merit, the merit of anything we do, reciting the Heart Sutra or doing Vajrasattva, to accompany that with a contemplation of emptiness. So even if we haven't realized emptiness, we just have a little teeny bit of understanding of emptiness, we can still at least say the words. So we can reflect that the I that created the destructive action, okay, if you're trying to purify some negative action you did in the past, and you think the I who did that action, as well as the action itself, and the seed it left on the mind, and so forth, all the different factors, all the different aspects of that negative action arise dependently. They all depend on different factors and are empty of inherent existence. So because they depend on other things, other factors, they don't stand alone, they're not inherently independently existing, therefore they're empty of inherent existence. Similarly, the person doing the purification practice, the action of purifying, and the karmic seeds that are purified lack inherent existence, but exist dependently. So although all the factors involved in creating non-virtue and in purifying negativities lack inherent existence, they still exist and function on the conventional level. And so purification is important. And it's good to do it every day. So having learned the Vajrasattva practice, then it's good if you can do that every day. There's other purification practices as well, like the one that's done here, 35 Buddhas. You didn't do that during this, did you do that? Yeah, but if you come for other activities here, then you might have learned the practice of the 35 Buddhas. So that's another practice of purification. So I think most people who are following Tibetan Buddhism do a purification practice every day, at least once, possibly more than once. And especially, if you do happen to do something negative, then as soon as possible do a purification practice. But at least it's good to do at night before going to bed. Spend a bit of time thinking back over the day and trying to recall if you did anything non-virtuous, and then generate the 4 powers. And if you're tired or short of time, you don't have to do a whole long practice. You could, just visualize Vajrasattva, recite 21 mantras, or visualize another deity, Tara, Chenrezig, Shakyamuni Buddha, recite their mantra. Those are all just as powerful. Okay, so the point is to do something positive, something virtuous to counteract that negative energy, and then resolve, determine to try your best to avoid it again. So that way we purify negative actions done during the day, before going to sleep, because it is said, I didn't mention this, but it said if we do some negative action one day and we don't purify that day, it actually increases day by day by day. Well, that's good to do something every day. Okay, so then I'll go through questions that were already asked. So one was about permanent space. When I talked about permanent space, this person said it sounds like it's synonymous with inherent existence. So I think one problem is the way we understand the word permanent and impermanent. So usually in our, culture, when we have the idea that permanent means eternal, like lasting forever, never going out of existence. But that's not the meaning in Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy. Permanent means changing moment by moment by moment. And it may not last forever. It might have just a short lifespan or a short time that it exists. So permanent doesn't mean eternal. It just means that it doesn't arise from causes and conditions. It wasn't kind of put together from causes and conditions coming together and giving rise to it. It doesn't exist like that. And while it exists, however long it exists, it doesn't change. It doesn't go through momentary changes. It's hard to understand this, but that's how it's explained. And it might come into existence and go out of existence. So an example might be, let's say there's a cup, like a porcelain cup, and inside the porcelain cup there's space. Right? There's space inside the cup. So the space inside the cup came into existence when the cup came into existence. When the cup was produced, then the space inside the cup, not really produced, we wouldn't say produced, but it came into existence as a sort of side effect of the cup being produced. Okay? So it did come into existence. And if the cup gets smashed, then the space inside the cup also goes out of existence. We can't really talk about it anymore because the cup isn't there. So we can't talk about the space inside the cup. So that example of, that's a type of space that comes into existence and goes out of existence, not eternal, it doesn't last forever. But it's permanent, it's still permanent in the sense that it doesn't go through momentary changes. And the same with emptiness. Emptiness is also a permanent phenomena. And it can come into existence and go out of existence. Because we can also say the emptiness of the cup. Okay, the cup has emptiness of inherent existence as its real nature, its ultimate nature, its real way of existing. But that emptiness, the emptiness of that particular cup, didn't exist before the cup did. It only came into existence when the cup did, when the cup was produced in a factory or whatever. So the emptiness of inherent existence of the cup started to exist, came into existence when the cup did. And as long as the cup is there, it continues to exist. But again, when the cup gets smashed, the emptiness of inherent existence of the cup also goes out of existence. So that's not easy to understand. But anyway, no, permanence isn't the same as inherent existence. Because even permanent things are empty of inherent existence because they depend. They depend on other things. Like just that example. The space of the cup depends on the cup. The emptiness of the cup depends on the cup. They don't exist independently. Okay, another question was, I actually had trouble understanding this question. Person is wondering, it's about malice, wondering if the roots of malice might be linked to institutionalized violence like racism and homophobia, though these are mental constructions, is this violence real, and should I aspire to do something about it? So I didn't understand this question, because when you say racism is a mental construction, does that mean it only exists in the mind? And questioning if violence is real or not. I mean, if you ask somebody who's been beaten up by the Ku Klux Klan or by the neo-Nazis, do you think violence is just a mental construct and not real? What do you think they would say? Okay.
I think it's from that saying that some teachers say that violence breeds violence. So reflecting on one's own seeds of malice, I think it might be that the roots come from maybe malice is the desire to reciprocate or revenge, right? So it means that there was some kind of harm that was done, so there's seeds of malice. So in that sense, it makes us contemplate that should we do something about it if the violence is, let's say, institutional or something broader than oneself?
So are you saying that one person's violence comes about because they have been treated violently, they have been abused, they have been subject to violence, so then they become violent? Well, Buddhism wouldn't completely agree with that. I mean, that would be one condition. That's like a condition to become violent. But Buddhism says the real cause of violence lies within our own mind. We already have within our mind hatred and the potential to act violently. And this is something we have done many, many times before in this life, but also past lives. We come into this life already with the seeds to be violent. I mean, when I was a kid, I would get into fights with my brothers and sisters. My parents didn't teach me that. I mean, it was precipitated usually by, my brother hits me and I hit them back. But but if I didn't have the seed to be violent, I don't think I would have done that. Like a Buddha, if somebody hits the Buddha, Buddha's not going to get violent. Yeah. So it's only if we have within our mind the seed to act violent, to be angry, and then have that impetus to act violently. Only if that is in our mind do we become violent. And then external conditions, like somebody treating us violently or watching a lot of violence on TV, computer games, and so on. There's lots of conditions that can nourish those seeds, water those seeds, so we become more violent. But the main cause is that seed in our mind. And where that comes from past lives, but it also comes from ignorance about the true nature of things, our own existence, the existence of everything. If we didn't have that, then all these other afflicted states of mind and ways of behaving wouldn't arise. So I think what you're talking about, like institutionalized violence, racism, and so on, so those are conditions. Those are conditions, but not the main cause. Is that helpful?
Mm-hmm. Then following that contemplation is that, let's say, aspiring bodhisattva, let's say, like Dr. King, right? Like I see Dr. King, if he contemplates the seeds of violence within him having caused by institutions, should aspiring bodhisattva go and try to change outside, or may continue, like purifying oneself? I don't know. It's a contemplation ongoing. Yeah, both. Yeah.
You can do both. I mean, we can't really change the world out there if we don't change ourselves. Yeah. So we do have to work on ourselves and reduce our own anger and tendency towards violence and so on. We do that, but we can also we can at least try. We can't completely eliminate all the anger and hatred and violence in the world, but we can at least do what we can. So examples like Dr. King and Gandhi, and I mean, His Holiness, he won the Nobel Peace Prize because he was determined, he at least tried to encourage the Tibetan people to not respond violently, to have a non-violent approach to their country being taken over. So, so we do as much as we can to live non-violently, encourage others to live that way, try to stop violence as much as we can. Do both.
When you think on collective karma, no, because we as a society also have collective karma. So the purification include this kind of karma when you think on collective harm or damage, you can think on influence of this collective karma. And the second part is, so we can recognize our agency to change cooperative conditions, because, for example, you mentioned the case of the Nazi that now is, these Nazis that now are on their trial, or no, this is thanks, the Nazis that are in South America, who are in South America, you remember?
Yeah.
So this is thanks also because now we have a justice system and human rights, and we as a society also influence in a cooperative condition. This is why I understand. So yeah, it is both, no? It's like we need to change ourselves, but we also have the agency and the power to influence in the cooperative condition. This is right?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't talk about collective karma here. I don't know if anyone else did, but there's not a lot of information about collective karma. It's just mentioned here and there, but they don't go into details about, what it is. They just say that if a group of people does an action together collectively, either virtuous or non-virtuous, then they create collective karma, which can ripen as that same group of people in some other lifetime in the future going through the same experience. So like here, for the last 5 days, this group of people has been creating virtue, listening to teachings and doing a lot of practice and creating a lot of virtue and purifying and so on. So we have created collective karma, and this can, I don't know exactly how and when, but sometime in the future, this same group of people might be together again, having some nice experience as a result of what we did here. So there's, like I say, there's not a lot of explanation about that, and it's difficult for us to really know what is collective karma versus what is individual karma. But they do say that, when there is a group of people having a similar experience, for example, a plane crash, okay? So a plane crashes and many people die, many people are injured, but some don't. Some walk away without any injuries. And so, Tibetan teachers would say, oh, this is because they didn't have the same karma as that other group of people. So the people who died, went through that experience and died, had a collective karma, and the ones who didn't die didn't. So they use that as an example of collective karma. But yeah, we do what we can with regard to our own karma, create virtue, avoid non-virtue, purify, and influence others. But, we can't really make others different than they are. So I would like to get on. There's quite a few other questions. Okay, then another question was, when is a practice solely for purification versus creating merit? Because I mentioned that Tonglen is both purification and creating merit. So the question was, well, what makes one practice just purification and just creating merit? So I was intrigued by that, and I was trying to find information. I didn't find, but it was actually Lama Zopa Rinpoche who made that comment about Tonglen being purifying. And so he said, he was talking about like when we are ill, when we're experiencing an illness, a disease, if we do Tonglen practice, like thinking, may I experience this on behalf of all sentient beings. By my going through this experience, may all sentient beings' suffering be eliminated. So that way we're taking it on for all beings. And he said, the main point of taking and giving Tonglen is that it purifies the causes of disease which are in our mind. So he's saying doing Tonglen doesn't mean everyone else is going to get cured of their disease, but it affects our own mind. It purifies the causes of disease which are in our mind. So that's where he talked about it being purifying, having that effect of purifying. And there's also the story of one Lama in Tibet, Geshe Chekawa, who, because originally the Tonglen practice wasn't taught openly, it was kind of restricted, only teachers would teach it to a few disciples, but not in a public way. And then one Lama, Geshe Chekawa, taught the Tonglen practice to some people who were suffering from leprosy. And by doing Tonglen, they were cured of leprosy, which is kind of amazing, because normally there's no cure for leprosy. And he was like, wow, this practice is really effective, really powerful. And then he started teaching it more openly to, so more people could learn it and practice it. So that also sounds like a kind of purification. Yeah, they managed to be free of their leprosy. And also, Lama Zopa Rinpoche often talks about, he often uses this term purify. For example, he says, when someone is dying, if you put a holy object on the top of their head, like a stupa, statue of Buddha, then this will purify their negativities. Or if you put a holy object on the head of an animal, this will purify them. But I'm thinking maybe that isn't the same kind of purification as what we're talking about here, which requires the 4 opponent powers. Because if the being isn't like the cat, isn't generating regret and so on, how can they really purify? So I was thinking maybe there's just different levels of purification, different ways that purification can happen. And here, like with the 4 opponent powers, it said that to really purify, we need to have all 4 of the powers present and not partially. But even if you don't have all 4, there can still be partial purification. So it seems like there's different ways that purification happens, different levels of purification. Yeah. And I think that, I don't think we need to worry so much about there being a hard and fast line between purification and accumulation of merit. I think the same practice can do both. Like, for example, when we do a purification practice with Vajrasattva, don't we also create merit? Yeah, it's also creating merit because we're taking refuge, generating bodhicitta, doing something virtuous like reciting the mantra. So we're creating merit at the same time as purification. So I think there's no contradiction. Yeah, they can overlap. Okay, another question was, I understand anger's root to be fear and fear to be the opposite of love. Well, that's not the Buddhist explanation. Maybe that's from Western psychology. But according to Buddhism, the root of anger is ignorance that doesn't see things correctly. That's the root of all the afflictions. But I think there can be connection between anger and fear, because, for example, when someone attacks us, threatens us, or attacks us, or hurts us, brings up fear, and we want to protect ourselves. And then anger can come up as a result of that, wanting to harm the person in order to protect ourselves. So there can be underlying fear, but maybe not in every case of getting angry. I'm not sure if it's always related to fear. The question, well, it also says, why is anger such a major defilement? Because it's a cause of enormous suffering for yourself, for others. It's also said to destroy good karma, depending on who we get angry at and how strong the anger is. But good karma, virtue that we create, merit that we create, gets destroyed by anger. So that's not something we really want to do, is it? I mean, it takes a lot of effort to create virtue, and then to have that just blown up by anger. That's not good. Yeah, so it's good to, Venerable's book, Working with Anger, is very good to, talk about the disadvantages of anger, the benefits of patience or fortitude, and then actual methods for working with anger. And then the question is also about wrathful compassion. So maybe, I'm not sure what that refers to, but some of the deities, the Buddhist deities, have a sort of, they're not smiling sweetly, but they have this kind of fierce expression on their face and holding weapons and so on. So it's said that the fierceness of those deities is not directed at sentient beings, but at our afflictions, at our ignorance and our anger and so on. So that's the object of their fierceness. And just in our ordinary experience, when people are dealing with children, like if you're a parent or you're a teacher with children, you may sometimes need to show a fierce expression and speak in a stern way, and maybe even sometimes give some punishment, although it's better, I think, to avoid physical punishment, but some kind of, stern and serious. I don't know what word you want to use. Maybe not wrathful, but be tough. And that's another, there's this term, tough love. I think it's used like when people are working with addicts, people who've been addicted, and they can sometimes be very clever about, manipulating you. So you sometimes have to use, they call it tough love. In your heart, there's love and compassion. You really want to help the person, but externally you have to be stern and tough. You agree? So, a bodhisattva would know, what kind of aspect to show, what kind of behavior, what kind of tone of voice to deal with different people, different beings. But the real point is to have compassion and love in your heart, not anger, not hatred, not the wish to harm, but the wish to benefit. But it's more about how you speak and behave outwardly. And then there was this question about elaborating on what uncontaminated karma is. So the word contamination, or sometimes it's pollution, refers to ignorance. So as long as our mind is still, we haven't realized emptiness, so we're still under the influence of ignorance, seeing things as inherently existing, independently existing, then the karma we create is contaminated or polluted by that ignorance. And the result of such karma will always be samsara, more experiences in samsara, rather than liberation or enlightenment. And so uncontaminated karma would be created only when a person has realized emptiness, the direct realization of emptiness. Then they're able to create uncontaminated karma, which is the cause of liberation. Okay, one last question. So somebody said that they've done a number of retreats here, and when doing retreat here, they wake up in the middle of the night with panic, and it seems like the more bliss they experience in meditation during the day, the more jarring it is for their body to wake up when the bliss disappears. Is this common? Is there something to be done about it? So I haven't heard of that specific experience, but it is common for people to have kind of unusual experiences when they start meditating. Like sometimes it could be physical, sometimes mental, sometimes it's pleasant, sometimes it's disturbing or even frightening. Anyone here had unusual experiences when you practice meditation or after meditation? So you see, it's common, but each person would have their own experience. It's not, everyone has the same experience. And I've heard teachers from various traditions talk about this and say that it is normal. We shouldn't be worried about it or upset about it. And when we're practicing meditation, our body and mind are doing something different than we normally do. And so it's just natural that there can be these unusual experiences as side effects, and they usually pass after a while. They don't last. And so the best approach to have is to not be bothered by them, not take them too seriously. Don't get attached to the blissful ones or have aversion or fear for the other ones. Just try to have an attitude of equanimity. Okay, just notice it, remember that it's impermanent, try not to get emotional about it, and they should go away after some time on their own. And if they don't, then check with a teacher or someone with more experience in meditation. There was a story told by Joseph Goldstein, who's one of the first Americans to start doing Buddhist meditation way back in the 60s, I think. And he said one time he was living in Burma in a monastery and doing a lot of meditation, very intensive meditation. And he got to the point where he said every time he meditated, he would just feel totally blissful. His whole body would be pervaded by bliss, which sounds great. And then he had to leave and go back to America for something, and then came back to Burma, and he expected, when he went back to the monastery and started meditating again, he would have that same experience, a bliss. But instead, he said his body felt like a painful mass of twisted steel every time he meditated. And he said he kept trying to get back to that bliss that he had before, and it didn't work. He wasn't able to get back to it. And then finally it occurred to him that that's not the point of meditation. The point of meditation is not to get back to some nice experience you had before, with sort of grasping, but to deal with whatever's happening and use whatever's happening in the moment to cultivate your good qualities like wisdom and compassion and so on. So it is typical that people go through different experiences, sometimes bliss, sometimes horror stories, and that's quite natural, quite normal. So it's best to just go with the flow and not, try not to worry. I don't know if we should continue or better to stop, because, well, we probably could go on for days. Questions. You may not get all your question answered in one retreat, but that's why it's good to come back. So let's stop here so that you do have a chance to do one more meditation before lunch. And I guess some of you are leaving today, so it's really nice that you could come, and I hope you come back and drive carefully. There's snow, and I hope this retreat has been beneficial and the teachings weren't too confusing or overwhelming. That happens too sometimes.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of love song's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Siddham Guru Rana Mandala Kamniryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Vajrasattva, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Buddhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzing Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends. May the deeds of explaining and practicing the Dharma, done by groups supporting the teachings and their upholders, who spread the view of dependent arising and non-violent actions in the 10 directions, and especially at Sravasti Abbey in the West Forest. Thank you, Venerable, for these truly wonderful teachings and for what a great way to start the year. Let's do some Kappa's recitation just to honor the author while we're doing our katas. It's on page 72 for people in the Blue Book. Mik meit se wei ter chen chen rezi dreame kempe wang po jam pel yang gang chen ke pe tso kien sang kappa lo sang dra fe jabla so wad. We'll go higher. Mik meit se wei ter chen chen rezi dreame kempe wang po jam pel yang gang chen ke pe tso kien sang kappa lo sam tra pe jabla sovadam. Make metse waiter chan chan razi. Dream a campe wang po jampel. Gang chen ke beto kyan song kapa. Lo sang drape shabla sovada. Make metse waiter chan chan razi. Dream a campe wang po jampel yang. Gang chen ke beto kyan song kapa. Lo sang drape jabla sovada. Make metse waiter chan chan razi. Dream a campe wang po jampel yang. Gang chen ke beto kyan song kapa. Lo sang drape jabla sovada. Make metse waiter chan chan razi. Dream a campe wang po jampel yang. Gang chen ke beto kyan song kapa. Lo sang drape jabla sovada. Make metse waiter chan chan razi. Dream a campe wang po jampel yang. Gang chen ke beto kyan song kapa. Lo sang drape jabla sovada.